Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Kajsa Stenstrom of Stenstrom Consulting. I'm in our Brussels office today in our green room together with Dr. Stuart Thompson. We're here to talk about the elections. You might think yet another election event. This one is not about the EU elections, nor about the US elections, but about the UK surprise announced elections that will take place on the 4th of July. Stuart?
Hello.
You're a good friend, former colleague, an expert in UK public affairs, communications, and on the labour movement.
Thank you. Yes, I've written a few books, but the day job is I run my own public affairs and communications consultancy. So it's lovely to be here to talk about the UK election, which I can talk about for ages. So you'll have to keep me to time, Kajsa.
Wonderful. So I cannot think of a better speaker to talk us through what's happening right now with the UK. I mean, I have many questions. What will this mean for the EU? Will there be a potential rapprochement between the UK and the EU? What will this mean for the wider world? Let's start with the question, was this date, 4th of July, a surprise to you?
Yes, I would say it was. When a government in the UK, because it makes up when it goes for the election, it has that ultimate power of deciding when the election is within a certain period. So, in effect, January 2025 is the very last date that Sunak could have gone to the polls. So, calling the election in December for a January 25 election. The question has been throughout, when does he feel most comfortable going for that election? Does he go sooner because he thinks the economy looks good? Small boat numbers, which is an issue across Europe in terms of immigration, but particularly for the UK with the English Channel boats coming across from France. Are the numbers down? Has his Rwanda policy of sort of trying to process illegal immigrants in a safe third country, will that have had some effect? He would go early. If that didn't look like it was going to happen, he would go late. So I personally always thought he might go for May. There were local elections, mayoral elections at that time. Why not have the whole lot together? But once he decided that he wasn't going to do that, then I think most people thought that actually the election would be towards the back end of this year, sort of October, November. So it took his own party by surprise, the opposition by surprise, when he went for July, and he certainly took me by surprise.
Us as well, because we were debating about this when we last met in London on whether this would be after the party conferences in the autumn. A leading question, who will win?
Well, look, if I was a gambling man, and I'm not, I normally lose quite badly when I gamble, but look, the bookies have Labour so far ahead, and the estimates of how many, the size of the majority is, if it was of a sort of 150, near a 200 seat majority, nobody would be surprised. So, in that sense, it's absolutely Labour's to lose. Can the current government, can Rishi Sunak squeeze the polls, not do quite so badly as most commentators think he will do? Yes, he can. And we've just had the leaders' debates, which we'll no doubt touch on, just in the last couple of days. And those attacks around tax, how much people will pay, was certainly at the heart of what Sunak was doing. So, look, he's doing his very best to try and put a brave face on it. But, look, nobody thinks he's going to win.
And if Labour then wins, as you and the polls are predicting, what will that mean for the UK-EU relations?
Well, look, I mean, we'll get the B word out there nice and early, Brexit. Nobody is talking about Brexit, nobody is talking about Europe in terms of the election. Why? Because both of the political parties, to a lesser extent the Liberal Democrats as the smaller party, but neither of the big political parties want to talk about it. For the Conservatives, it's too much association with Boris Johnson, disgraced former Prime Minister, lockdown parties and so on. There's also lots of polls that say actually lots of people have changed their minds, but at the same time, Labour don't want to go there either because they fear if they start to appear to be seen as too pro-European, then what will happen is they will lose a lot of the base, a lot of the supporters that are maybe coming back to the party with that sort of red wall, particularly North of England, but not just exclusively North of England electorate. So they don't want to talk about it either. So in electoral terms, or the election terms, not much has been spoken about it.
But isn't there a big chunk of the Labour electorate that wants to reverse Brexit? Or are we wrong in thinking that from this side of the channel?
No, I think you're not wrong. There is, but everybody's got this sort of. I'm sure there's an Amata sort of, nobody will talk about it sort of approach to Europe. Now, that doesn't mean to say, and I believe the relationship between the UK and the EU will be closer. Come a Labour government anyway. So whilst they don't want to talk about it, we will find some natural drift. Look, there are lots of issues that, frankly, we need to work with European colleagues on around. Well, we've just mentioned small boats and immigration issues, illegal and legal. We could talk about net zero. We could talk about inward investment into the UK to deal with some of the challenges we face around infrastructure investment. A whole range of different issues that actually, if the UK, we want to be a successful nation state, we need to work with Europe. So I think there will be a sort of a thawing of relationships. Will it go as far as many hope? No. Will it be as static or quiet as it has been for the last few years? No as well. We'll end up somewhere in between those two positions, at least initially.
So you're suggesting that it will be static for the foreseeable future, let's say?
I think in the short term, yes, but just whilst that, if it's Labour, depending on the size of the majority, if it's a big majority, Labour will want to be seen to be delivering domestically, and then after a couple of years, you will see there will be more active talk about the relationship with Europe. It'll be there, but it will be behind the scenes, I think straight away, but I think in a more public way, that might take a little bit of time. Now, anything bigger than that, in terms of, anything a bit more formal in the relationship, I think we're still some way away from that.
A few years then.
I think so.
I want to jump in also with questions about the other parties. You say that nobody's mentioning the Brexit issue, so no one has gone to, campaigning on bringing the UK back into Europe, so to speak.
No. That's just a bridge too far. Do we get there over a period of time? We might do, but I think that's a very long-term process. I think much more is about the practical day-to-day type relationships that the UK require. So as much for us as arguably, or more for us than for Europe. Those relationships will start. Labour will want a different type of relationship with the European Union than we currently have. Now, whether the European Union will allow us to have that, whether they trust the UK, I think these are all big issues. It's not up to us about the sort of relationship it wants, as we found out in the sort of the divorce. But certainly that future relationship, we both have to decide. The UK has to be fine with it, and the Commission has to be fine with it. The European Union has to be fine with it.
And we've also noticed that there are some of our, let's say, old familiar names from Brussels who are running in the UK elections. Nigel Farage mentioned his running recently. Does that play into this debate at all?
No, I think you angle? Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, we've tended to focus on it from the UK election perspective. So Farage said he wasn't going to run. He wanted more of a role in the US election. That was the more important as he saw it. But then he's miraculously changed his mind. He is going to run for a seat. He's become the leader of the Reform Party, and therefore can take part in the leadership debates, has more profile. Now, people have their views of him and why he's doing that. But I think in direct relation to your point, Kajsa, what that means is that people are even more scared about talking about Europe because Farage is there. The spectre of Farage is now absolutely at the forefront of the election.
But you could also argue that, ironically, Farage has brought the B word back into the UK election debate in some form or shape because of his past.
Because of his past, yes,
Yeah.
but in so far, in terms of his statements, and this may change. Look, we're only a couple of days in from him sort of entering the race. He hasn't talked about it. He's net zero. He is small boats immigration. Now he can blame Europe for that, and I'm sure there will be issues where he will try. But in terms of the issues that are front and foremost of what he's said so far, it's almost like I've won Brexit, I've won Europe in that sense. Now I'm on to these other challenges, and I think why we focus on it, particularly from a UK election perspective, is because if you look at the polls, if you look at some of the where the parties are standing, and Reform, I think, are standing in most, if not all, the constituencies, they could do real damage to the Conservatives. So instead, when we talked earlier on about the size of the Labour majority, instead of that majority or the Conservatives getting, 150 to 200 seats, which would be bad but not a disaster, you start going below 150, you start going below 100, you've effectively become a fringe party themselves. And that's the sort of damage that the Conservatives are absolutely petrified that Farage is going to inflict on them.
Very interesting. If we talk now a little bit about the process, you've had the first TV debate with the candidates very recently. How did that go? Who was the winner in that
Winners
debate?
and losers. Well, look, so we just the other day we had the first head-to-head between Starmer and Sunak. We then have a series of others. They battle it out a couple more times over the next few weeks. There's a 7-way leaders debate later this week as well between the sort of the smaller parties as well as Labour and Conservative, but not represented by the prime ministerial candidates. Look, people have different views of these things. Frankly, I was always, when they first started, quite a fan, and I thought it would be good for democracy that there were televised leadership debates. Frankly, most of the time they've been a bit of an utter disappointment. They don't really reveal very much, and I think certainly the format for the one that happened earlier this week, which was a sort of 45-second, response time, the moderator asking tell us what you think about this, yes or no. I don't think that format really worked. It didn't give either of them a chance to sort of tackle each other or respond effectively to each other's questions or allegations that were thrown up. Personally, I thought it was a bit of a split. I didn't think anybody came out of it particularly badly or particularly well, but I suppose there were two things from that. One is that because, again, as we've mentioned, Labour is so far ahead in the opinion polls that actually for Starmer it was more about not making a complete mess up of the whole thing. So as long as you don't do really badly, you can lose a little bit, but that's fine. It's not going to change the poll in any meaningful way. So in that sense, he won because it didn't go badly wrong. But the issue that has come out of it, and arguably, we've got to focus much more on issues, not the personalities, but the issue that came out of it was Sunak throwing a tax number around. Working families will pay £2,000 a year more in tax if you get a Labour government. There is now a big fallout over the last couple of days from that, which is, where did this number come from? He claimed it was an independent Treasury analysis. It was no such thing. Informed by special advisors, political special advisors, providing the information and the basis for the numbers to be made from. There were a number of issues that weren't covered, etc. So Starmer has accused, and Labour have accused him of lying. And you don't tend to get that in politics very often, especially not in UK politics. There tends to be a sort of slightly old-fashionedness about a lot of the things that we still do and a lot of the ways that politicians behave. So to call somebody a liar is pretty bold. So for me, for that debate anyway, they were the main takeaways.
Very interesting. But if we come back to the EU-UK relationship, we're not talking about Brexit anymore, or Brexit reverse, for that matter. We're talking about the existing relationship, the trade agreement. Are there specific areas you foresee that Labour will be working on more than others that will set it aside from what we've seen so far, or other specific policies or sectors that Labour will want to work more with the European Union on than others, as far as the trade agreement allows it, let's say?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they haven't spoken about these things in those terms.
Yeah. Would you guess?
Well, when you look at their priorities, when you look at the 5 missions that Labour have set out, there's a big push on net zero. But frankly, if you don't get the economic growth that the party needs, they're not going to be able to pay for the improvements in the public sector, particularly the health service and education. And again, I'm sorry, just slightly cutting across myself, but when we look at the election debate, where did Starmer do particularly well? It was on those safe Labour areas, those safe left areas generally of the public sector, health in particular, and education. So he's going to be looking for help from the European Union or cooperation, relationships around things like that. So about growth. How can we, as a continent, if I can put it like that, unlock some of that growth potential that we, as the UK, need? Obviously, all countries need, but the UK needs. So that will be an emphasis.
It's really interesting that you say that net zero and the green policies could be a focus area when we look at the European elections. Sorry, but I still have to mention the name because indeed in the European elections that are now taking place starting from today, there's a whole debate about going back on the Green Deal and not push ahead with the green policy legislation, or at least have some sort of break in that area. And you're saying that the UK is particularly keen on the green policies.
They are, but they're not keen on the cost, which will be the same, I'm sure, in the European elections as it will probably be in the US elections as it is in the UK elections as well. So, would you expect a Labour government to be greener than the current incumbents? Yes. Have they scaled back some of their plans, as some critics would have it? Yes, they appear to have done. They don't want to spend the money that they originally appeared to be committing to the green agenda. But at the same time, if you want to, reduce household, electricity, gas, and other costs, well, how do you do that? You've got to transform the infrastructure in terms of the, getting better, more renewables out there, and changing the nature of the national grid. You need that, absolutely, but you also need insulated homes. It's, in that sense, it's fairly basic politics. It's not; they're not difficult. Well, building stuff can be quite difficult, but in terms of how do we control? We sort of know what to do. It's then up to the commitment of that government to then put some money into it, or find a way of providing that finance for it to happen.
And that's really the case also this side of the channel, because the financing and the limits of the Green Deal are very much central questions to the ongoing campaign and this weekend's elections. What happens if the Conservatives win?
I think there would be an awful lot of very shocked people. I think that would be the first thing. And probably a number of sore heads on the July the 5th after everybody's sort of either, depending on
Bad
which side,
betting results, people losing money.
There'll be a lot of money lost, but I think either a lot of hangovers, one way for celebration or commiseration, whichever way it would go. I think that's a really good question. I mean, one of Sunak's constant refrains is, "I have a plan and Labour don't." So again, harking back to the debate, that's one of his absolute core messages. I have a plan, the other guy doesn't. But I think if you were to ask anybody, okay, what does that plan mean in reality, outside of, well, he would like to implement some tax cuts, I'm not sure anybody really knows what that plan is. So what does that, what would a Sunak-led government look like post-election? I think it's pretty unclear. I mean, we'll get the manifestos hopefully within the next week or so. But the policies thus far have been, tax cuts, some talk about national service for young people, which, depending on where you are in the age range, goes down badly or not. And locking people up for longer for murder. So again, good sort of core right of centre policy areas.
But this brings me on to the question of what happens next. What are the timelines after the 4th of July? How long does it form to then shape the government and the next agenda, and when will that take effect?
Yeah, we're pretty brutal in the UK. So you win, or the results get announced. Literally, the Prime Minister gets slung out sort of that day, so the 5th. So the election's on the 4th. On the 5th, you find out who's won. Out goes the stuff in a removal van from Number 10, and in
if
comes
there is a removal van.
If there's a removal, good point. If there's a removal van. and in comes the new person. They go to the king. They ask for permission, but that's it. But that all happens sort of more or less straight away.
So very different from Belgium there.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm voting for the first time in the Belgian elections this weekend.
Different from Belgium, different from the US, where it takes
yeah.
months, that transition period. There's none of that. You know, you
Yes.
literally go next day, new government in. Absolutely. So then there's a little bit more time. The Prime Minister, new Prime Minister, whatever, would then appoint a cabinet. Some of those will be known. We'll know most of those people. There'll be some big hitters already there. They won't change very much. Some of the other, lesser roles, you say, well, yeah, a bit of reshuffle there as well. They'll then stick to that classic 100 days. When that sort of 100 days from winning is like, what can we do to show that we're absolutely, delivering for the country within that short space of time? So that will be the sort of priority. There'll be a King's Speech, which is where they lay out the legislative agenda for Parliament. That happens towards the back end of July. As you've mentioned, we've got the party conferences in September, beginning of October. But by going early as well for Sunak, that becomes a challenge. Well, and one that I've been trying to think about as well, because that 100 days, a lot of that is over August. With the best one in the world, people want some holidays.
Maybe Sunak wants some holiday. Maybe that's.
He said he's not going to go back to. He said he's not going to go back to California, so it'd be a UK-based holiday in North Wales or somewhere. I don't know, but not during the football, which he got criticised for as well. So absolutely. It's a brutal sort of business, but that 100 days. So if anybody looking from here, sort of thinking, what will Labour mean in office? Look at that 100 days. That will give you a really good indication what the rest of that term in office will look like.
I mentioned at the beginning that we wanted to look at the impact of a potential change in UK government, also on outside of the UK-EU relationship and the wider world. I mean, it's a challenging question, but. I wanted to ask you about the UK special relationship with the US. How do you see that changing if Labour now wins in July, and also potentially a change of government in the US? It's a multi-layered question, but any views on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, Labour have always, for the Labour Party, for the left in the UK, there has always been an ongoing tension between whether they look to Europe or look to the US, and that has varied over the years. And Blair, I know obviously later in his time in office, this created some massive problems with armed conflict. But to start with, he became very pro-European, riding on the bicycles around Amsterdam with the other European leaders, looking young and dynamic, and all those other things that the John Major and the previous Conservative government hadn't looked. But he also had a good relationship, particularly later, say not without its faults, with particularly Clinton to start with, absolutely, and then later on George Bush as well. So Labour can look both ways. Now the trouble is, of course, as you rightly alluded to, the relationship with Biden is one thing. A relationship with the other guy, is completely different, and Trump is a different sort of political animal. It has come up as an election question. What will you do, Starmer? And Sunak as well. What will you do? And it's exactly the right answer. Look, if somebody is democratically elected, whether they are a convicted criminal, as Trump is, although he will appeal, or not, if America, the US voted him in, he's the president. That's who you deal with.
Right, so I think maybe we will stop here for today, but we will be speaking regularly about your elections and our elections.
I'm looking forward to those as well.
And thank you very much for joining us today. Again, we'll be back with more election information on both sides of the channel.
Thank you.